Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz. Inside of Auschwitz, it was hell on earth for the prisoners who were held within the concentration camp walls. Things inside of the camp were dire. There was a shortage of food, death lurked around every corner, and the prisoners lived not knowing if tomorrow would be their last day on earth. The fear inside the camp was intense, and hundreds of thousands of victims of the Holocaust would not even make their way inside the camp walls, being taken straight to the gas chamber. The stories of brutality by the guards were prominent, and after the Second World War, a number of staff who worked at the camp were sentenced to death for their crimes. The most high profile was former Commandant Rudolf Hoess, along with other guards such as Irma Grese, Josef Kramer and many more. It was guards, along with doctors, who were placed on trial, and many other service staff, including cooks. However, one of the strangest stories inside of the camp is that within the desperation and barbarism, an orchestra was formed that played music and held a concert each Sunday for the SS. So join us today as we look at the Orchestra of Auschwitz, and remember, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Now, Auschwitz itself was separated into three main elements: Auschwitz I, the main slave labour element; Auschwitz II, Birkenau, the mass extermination centre; and Auschwitz III, Monowitz, the IG Farben factory in which slave labour was also used. Now, the orchestra was formed in April of 1943 by Maria Mandel, a rather ruthless female guard who worked as a supervisor inside of the women's camp, and also Franz Holzer, the man who oversaw the women's camp as the commandant. Initially, it was made as an attempt to show off camp morale in newsreel footage, to show that an orchestra existed and that things in Auschwitz were rather civilised, something incredibly different to the reality. It was also used to pick up the spirits of prisoners, and also the staff in particular. It was to be used for propaganda purposes, and was led first by a Polish music teacher, Sofia Salska. Initially, the orchestra was rather limited in its numbers. However, Jews were allowed to join a month after it was created, and the numbers of the ensemble grew. It was populated by members of different countries, and musicians came from France, Germany, Greece, Poland, the Netherlands, the Soviet Union, Belgium, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. It was a diverse group, and within a few months it had around 20 members. But in 1944, the numbers doubled to between 42 and 47 players. The orchestra in the early months was made up as amateur musicians, and inside it had a string section complete with a mandolin and accordion, and it needed a bass section. It utilised the rare musical instruments that they could get their hands on, and they also borrowed instruments from the male orchestra that had been established earlier. It also used sheet music, and its range of songs were rather limited in what it could play. This was down to the amount of sheet music they could use, what the SS wanted to hear, and also what the conductor knew. The songs played were mainly German marching tunes and folk and military songs. There was rivalry between the male and female orchestra, and their Nazi patrons also felt a slight rivalry. The rules for the orchestra were slightly different. For example, Heinz Lewin, a Jewish violin maker from Germany, would go into the women's camp to go and give bass lessons. The ensemble did contain two professional musicians, cellist Anita Lasker-Wolfish and vocalist and pianist Fania Fenelon. They both wrote their stories whilst inside the orchestra, and Wolfish even recounted one time in which she was asked to play Schumann for Josef Mengele, the horrific angel of death and doctor who performed sadistic human experiments. The first conductor was replaced by Alma Rosa, an Austrian Jewish violinist, in the August of 1943. She came from a hugely distinguished family in Oster-German music, and her father was the concertmaster for the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra and the leader of the Rose String Quartet. Her uncle was also a famous composer, Gustav Mahler, and Alma was incredibly gifted on the violin, renowned around Europe for her skill. She initially fled to London with her father when the German annexed Austria in 1938, however, left for Holland to continue her work as a performer. But as the Germans invaded the Netherlands, she found herself once again living under Nazi occupation. She was arrested after trying to slip through Belgium and France to go to Switzerland, and was then sent to an internment camp before being sent to Auschwitz. As she arrived in Birkenau, she was appointed the conductor of the orchestra rather quickly. She was well respected by the SS guards because of her standing within classical music, and they even referred to her as Frau Alma. But through this status, she managed to recruit Jews to join the orchestra, and those inside the group were given special permissions and privileges inside of Auschwitz. Alma made sure that all of her musicians were given a shower daily and new uniforms each week, along with better food rations and better accommodation. The work they were required to complete was also rather lenient compared with the hard labour of the other prisoners. Rosa was able to convince the Nazis to spare her musicians from selections, the process that prisoners were forced to undergo before they were sent to the gas chambers. Prisoners would be inspected regularly for any sign of ill health. Even something minor such as a tooth abscess could result in a prisoner being sent to their deaths, so her musicians were given special treatment. One mandolin player from the orchestra was struck down with typhus at Auschwitz, and she was then sent to the camp infirmary. When the angel of death, Josef Mengele, made his way around the ward to select prisoners to be murdered, he asked, "What's with this one?" pointing at the ill lady. One of the nurses said, "She's from the orchestra," and because of this, Mengele just left and her life was spared. So even the most notorious and evil doctor at Auschwitz could not send a member of the orchestra to their death. This made some untouchable. There were fewer professional female musicians in the early 20th century, and there was a male orchestra inside of Auschwitz. Because of the smaller pool of talented musicians to choose from, Alma Rosa trained her musicians tirelessly to improve the quality, and they performed at camp 2 or 3 hours a day, rehearsing for around 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Rosa knew that lives depended on the quality of the orchestra. However, in April of 1944, Rosa died from mysterious causes. She died of a sudden illness, possibly food poisoning, and she had spent 10 months protecting the lives of the orchestra. After her death, the work of the orchestra was scaled back, and the women were sent back to work. It was officially dissolved in November of 1944, and the women of the orchestra were transferred across to Bergen-Belsen. As the Soviet Red Army was approaching, along with the Allies, the prisoners were transferred to camps away from the front line. 3 orchestra members died at Belsen, as the conditions were disgusting, with disease and death everywhere, along with the barbaric and horrific guards who treated prisoners terribly. Music and the Orchestra of Auschwitz offered a small number of prisoners a chance to be saved, or to live a little longer than most. It did not guarantee survival. However, it did protect them from horribly tough hard labour and the immensely bad conditions. They were given slightly better food and slightly warmer uniforms and clothes. But for many, music offered some hope inside of Auschwitz. It was said by a member of the orchestra that, for all of us in the orchestra, it was our music making that served as our most important life preserver and stimulant during this period. We desired so much satisfaction and joy from performing in concert that we found ourselves forgetting for a moment that we were condemned souls living in a hell that no one could never imagine. Music is a powerful tool, And even in Auschwitz, it's allowed some people to take their mind briefly off of the horror. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.